The public phase of the Democrats' impeachment inquiry into President Trump takes center stage today as lawmakers begin public hearings. According to CBS News, 52% of Americans believe Democrats have done a bad job of handling the inquiry. Meanwhile, 56% say that the president has not handled it well.
Nonetheless, testimony will be heard today by State Department official George Kent and the U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, William Taylor. Joining us to discuss what we can expect from today's hearing is the journalist Chris Hedges. He joins us now via Skype. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Not at all.
Absolutely. So, Chris, I mean, first of all, you've of course been, very critical of some of these investigations, not just in impeachment, going back to Mueller, to the Mueller testimony and much of that investigation. How do you see the current state of play things here, and do you think it'll actually have any impact?
Well, that's unknown. I mean, it depends ultimately on the Republican Party leadership. I think my critique comes not from any argument about whether or not Donald Trump committed crimes. He committed crimes, impeachable crimes, on the first day he took office under the Emoluments Clause, clearly attempts to obstruct justice during the Mueller report. And I was critical of the Mueller report because there was nothing there. There wasn't collusion, which wasted 2 years of hyperbolic news commentary. But my primary point is that the impeachment is driven by the deep state, and the deep state is real. Those are the bankers and the corporatists and the lobbyists and the intelligence chiefs. We see them now very publicly attacking Trump, the technocrats, the generals, because Trump has been such a disaster in terms of the management of empire, insulting our traditional allies, the court system, the press, Congress, all of his inanities, impulsiveness, and his assault on domestic bipartisan foreign policy, and in particular, the empire's endless wars. And I think that really is what is driving this impeachment. If it was about the rule of law, this would have been instituted by the Democratic Party in the first few months of the Trump presidency. But Pelosi was quite candid at the time that it wasn't politically, she didn't feel advantageous. I think that we have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, well, you were the first person to make this point, which I really hadn't occurred to me before, that the impeachment of all the things that Trump has done. It's very telling that this impeachment inquiry was sparked when he went after essentially another elite. When it was Joe Biden that was being messed with, suddenly that was the thing that caused them to have to go forward with the impeachment inquiry and for Nancy Pelosi to override her previously stated political instincts. Just lay that out and put that also in a little bit of historical context for us.
Right. So no, that's a very important point. That Trump had committed impeachment, not in my mind, but it would appear to be impeachment offenses previously. But what he did was target another section of the ruling elite, in particular Joe Biden, who the Democratic donor class are trying to anoint as the next Democratic nominee for president. So this is exactly what happened. If you go back to Nixon's impeachment, all of the things that Nixon did, break-ins and the dirty tricks, and had long been carried out by the Nixon White House against anti-war activists, including breaking into Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office. But as soon as the Nixon White House carried this out against the Democratic hierarchy by breaking into the headquarters of the Watergate, the Democratic Party headquarters of the Watergate, then it became an impeachable offense. And I think that there is an historical analogy to be made here, that is what triggered the impeachment.
That's a really interesting point. It's been especially frustrating, Chris, watching the media and kind of the Democratic Party elevate, these NSC staffers who, like you said, these technocrats who are like, well, I disagreed with the policy or the transcript after the call. And it's like, well, you're not supposed to have a say. Like, we're not supposed to care about what an NSC staffer thinks about U.S. foreign policy. These are unelected people, to your point.
Well, what we've seen, which I think is quite remarkable, if we put it in historical context, is a very public war between the deep state and Trump. And that began the moment he was elected. So you have people like former CIA Director John Brennan, the former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, who, by the way, are now found both paid news cable commentators. You have, of course, the former head of the FBI, James Comey, and they have been slogging this line that Trump was a tool of Moscow, and now, of course, they are the cheerleaders in this current impeachment. And then we've had, and these are the people who leaked the stories about the supposed P tapes and the blackmail and the repeated contacts with Russian intelligence. That was all Brennan, Clapper, and Comey. And now they've been joined by other former high-ranking intelligence officials like Michael Hayden and Andrew McCabe, along with former senior generals. So William McRaven, James Mattis, H.R. McMaster, John Kelly, Barry McCaffrey, and others. And that's really kind of unprecedented when you think about it, that the leaders of military, former military and intelligence leaders publicly going after the president.
Mm-hmm. And has the media responded to that? Do they treat that national security state and those national security officials, do they treat them the same way in the Trump administration as they have under other administrations?
I would say yes, and there's a kind of uncritical veneration. I mean, I spent 7 years in the Middle East. I was the Middle East bureau chief for the New York Times. I speak Arabic, and I think that the greatest strategic blunder in American history was the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. This kind of fatal military fiasco is a feature of all late empires. The historians call it micro-militarism, but it's when a declining empire squanders its last capital, economic, political, and military on these intractable, unwinnable conflicts. Even though it's been, if you look historically, what's happened in almost now 2 decades of warfare, it's just been disaster piled on disaster, Democrat and Republican. And then again, this is about the machinations of the deep state. And so as this chaos and the only winner in this war is Iran, which was the country they wanted to diminish.
Right.
No one's accountable, and the press is completely servile. So I think what we're seeing is an example of how, and I think this is, by the way, Trump's greatest sin, that he actually voiced this critique of these endless wars. And so, yeah, these generals and intelligence chiefs are almost deified, and I think that was also true under the Obama administration. What we didn't see is these former intelligence chiefs and senior military leaders going after the president. That's completely unprecedented, I think.
Yeah, well said, Chris. We thank you so much for joining us. Really interesting.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Next on Rising, America's nurses are backing Bernie as the senator prepares for a big campaign swing through California.
Friend of the show and senior Sanders advisor Chuck Rocha is going to tell us more about the campaign's upcoming journey through the Golden State and much more. That's next.